There is a kind of silence more powerful than any shout, a silence not born of absence but of intention. In our world, noise is mistaken for significance. The louder a thing is said, the more true it is assumed to be. Yet there are moments, holy and strange, when the command of God arrives not in the form of a trumpet blast, but like a whisper that presses itself against the conscience. Open this, it says. Not later, not when it is convenient, but now, urgently. And then it says something even more perplexing. But in silence. We are used to divine instructions being accompanied by signs and wonders, as if the only way God speaks is through fire or flood. But there are places in Scripture, and more often in the hidden corridors of our own lives, where the sacred comes wrapped in quiet, the kind of quiet that hushes even the inner monologue. This is not the silence of emptiness. It is the silence of attention. It is the silence a child holds when they are about to hear the truth of a thing they cannot yet understand but dare not miss. It is the silence one keeps, not because there is nothing to say, but because the moment is too large for words. When God gives us something to open, be it a truth, a calling, a confession, a season of trial or revelation, it often comes with two contradictory feelings. One is the deep, unsettling urgency, a quickening of the heart, a thrum under the skin that says, now is the time. The other is the overwhelming instinct to not draw attention to it, to carry it, as one carries fire in the palm, not because it is fragile, but because it is too powerful to be handled carelessly. This is where we must part ways with the habits of the world. The world is eager to unwrap, display, publicize. It treats revelation like a headline, but God's gifts are not spectacles, they are sacraments, and sacraments are received in silence. If God has told you to open something now urgently, but quietly, it is likely because the thing He is asking you to open is not meant to be shouted from rooftops. It is meant to change you first, before it ever changes the world around you. There are treasures that rot when exposed too soon. There are truths that crumble when discussed before they are understood. And there are holy things that lose their holiness when paraded for approval. That is why urgency must sometimes walk hand in hand with silence. The soul must be quick to obey and slow to speak. This is not cowardice, it is reverence. It is the knowledge that to open what God has given is not merely an action, but a posture of the heart, a willingness to kneel before a mystery and not demand an explanation. In a time where immediacy and spectacle reign, the soul that learns to respond to God swiftly and silently has discovered something precious, that the voice of God does not always echo, but it always endures, that what is opened in silence is often what makes the most noise in eternity. So if you find yourself holding something sacred and the Spirit urges you, open it now, but quietly. Do not mistake the silence for smallness. The quietness is not a limit, it is a vessel, a holy hush that cradles something eternal. Be swift, be silent, be faithful. Not all commands from heaven come wrapped in thunder. Sometimes they arrive in the quiet hours, when the world is still turning, but the soul is listening. There are moments when something within us is stirred, not by fear nor by spectacle, but by an inner insistence. This must be opened now. It is not curiosity that drives this urgency, nor ambition, nor even pain. It is the unshakable sense that a door has been placed before us and the key is already in our hand. What lies behind it may not be understood. It may not be easy, but it is necessary, and the instruction, though silent, is unmistakable. Open it urgently. This kind of divine urgency is not the sort that panics or shouts. It does not rush like the world's anxiety. Rather, it is steady and clear, like the toll of a distant bell that only the soul can hear. There is no time to deliberate, and yet there is no chaos. When God speaks in this way, He calls not for a frantic gesture, but a faithful one. We are not meant to open in haste, but in holy ready. The timing is not of our choosing, yet the task is ours to fulfill. Too often we believe that what matters must be seen by others to be real. But in the economy of heaven, the most urgent things are often the least visible. God may command something to be done at once, but without witnesses, without recognition, and, most confoundingly, without words. That is where the second instruction comes in, but in silence. It is this second command that we find most difficult. We know how to act when called, and we even know how to endure, but we rarely know how to be silent. The silence God demands here is not the mere absence of sound, but the fullness of attention. It is the silence of reverence, the silence that understands something sacred is being entrusted to us. When God asks for silence, it is not because there is nothing to say, but because words would diminish the weight of the thing being done. There is a kind of silence that is not passive, but fierce. It stands guard at the gate of the soul. It protects what is fragile, not because it is weak, but because it is precious. When we are told to open something quietly, it is often because the moment is not yet ready for the ears of the crowd. The treasure is not for display, it is for transformation. God does not give revelations as performances, He gives them as seeds. And seeds do not grow under spotlights. They grow in soil, beneath silence, in the hidden places of faith. We long to share what we've seen, to explain what we've felt, to justify what we're doing, but the holiest work often begins in solitude. To obey quietly is to trust completely. It means believing that the one who called you sees you even when no one else does. It means accepting that the impact of your obedience may not be immediate, may not be visible, and may not ever be understood by those around you. And yet it will matter eternally. There is power in that kind of obedience, the power to open what must be opened urgently, before hesitation sets in, before fear drowns it, before the world offers a more comfortable distraction, and the power to do it silently, without fanfare, without approval, without even full understanding, only trust, only faith, that what God has asked to be opened will reveal what only He could place inside, and that in the silence of your obedience, heaven hears everything. There is a strange tension in the way heaven speaks, never rushed, yet never late. Some commands come wrapped not in thunder, but in stillness, and they arrive with a clarity that leaves no room for delay. You may not know the full shape of what lies ahead, but you know this: it must be opened now. The urgency is not emotional, not the panicked voice of fear or restlessness. It is a summons from beyond the veil, the kind of call that bypasses your mind and lands directly in your soul. You feel it not as pressure, but as purpose. This is not a suggestion or a curiosity. It is a divine imperative. Something has been sealed until now, and the hour has struck. What God has prepared in the hidden places must be uncovered. But then, just as surely as the call to action comes, so does another, quieter command. But do it in silence. Silence is not what we expect when we are told to move urgently. We associate urgency with noise, sirens, shouts, alarms. Yet God does not conform to our theatrics. His urgency is not loud because it is not born of chaos. It is born of sovereignty. When he asks for something to be done in silence, he is not asking for secrecy out of fear, he is asking for reverence. The thing being opened is not for display. It is not a banner to be waved in triumph. It is a sacred charge, something that must first do its work in you before it is ever spoken aloud. God's silence is not a muzzle, it is a sanctuary. It is the soft wrapping around holy fire. To break that silence prematurely is to risk turning the sacred into the shallow, the eternal into spectacle. We are not good at silence anymore. We fill our spaces with commentary, our thoughts with explanations, our hearts with the noise of our own opinions. But when heaven speaks and then commands silence, it is not silencing you out of dismissal. It is inviting you into a deeper communion. God knows the weight of what He has given. He knows the distractions of the crowd, and so, sometimes, He asks you to carry the treasure inwardly, even while the world sees only your stillness. There is obedience in speaking when God says speak, but there is even deeper obedience in staying silent, when every part of you longs to be heard. In this kind of silence, something more profound begins to happen. You discover the hidden work of obedience, the kind that does not make headlines, the kind that cannot be measured by applause or outcome. It is the obedience of Abraham climbing a mountain, of Mary pondering things in her heart, of Christ withdrawing to pray. It is the work that roots you when you open what God has asked you to open. Quietly, faithfully, you are changed, not in a flash, but in the slow and sacred forming of character. The silence is not a pause in the story. It is the part of the story where the soul is formed. What God commands to be opened urgently but in silence is often the thing that leads not to immediate understanding, but to eventual transformation. And so the one who hears such a call must walk carefully, not timidly, but reverently, quick to obey, slow to explain, fast to kneel, slow to rise, because in this place, noise is not power, silence is. In this place, the treasure is not in being seen, but in being faithful. You may open it alone, with trembling hands and a quiet heart, but heaven watches, and that is enough. There is a moment when the soul knows, without trumpet, without writing in the sky, that something has been entrusted to it, not tomorrow, not eventually, but now. An urgency not born of panic, but of precision. Something must be opened, not because we are ready, but because the time is. This sense of divine immediacy does not always come with explanation. It comes as a still command, pressing on the spirit like a sealed envelope placed into your hand with a glance that says, "This is the hour." There's no time to ask what others think. No committee, no delay. Only this clear interior instruction. Open. Now. But God, in His unfathomable wisdom, rarely gives just one word. With the call to urgency comes a boundary, but in silence. At first this seems a contradiction. Why would something so important, so immediate, be accompanied by stillness? Shouldn't the world know? Shouldn't you shout, proclaim, announce? But that is not His way. Urgency and silence are not opposed in heaven. They are companions. The thing He is asking you to open is not yet for others. It is for you. Or rather, it is for Him through you. And when heaven speaks in whispers, it is not because the message is small. It is because the work is sacred. In our age where noise is equated with influence, silence is mistaken for irrelevance. But there is a silence that bears the weight of eternity. It is not empty, it is full, full of awe, full of obedience, full of the fear of the Lord, which is not the terror of punishment, but the trembling awareness that you are standing in the presence of something too large for words. To act urgently and silently is not weak faith, it is the strongest kind. It is the kind that does not need to be seen to be real. It is the kind that walks forward without applause, opens the thing given, and carries it quietly because it is holy. And this perhaps is the most painful and precious part. The work God asks you to do in silence may never be understood by others. They may see the effects, but not the encounter. They may wonder why you move differently now, why your eyes carry something weightier, quieter, deeper. But they will not know what you were asked to open. Because heaven did not ask you to explain it, it asked you to bear it. And the things of God are often too large for explanation, and too fragile for the clumsy hands of public opinion. Some things are between God and the soul, forever. There is also a humility here that is hard to learn. To open something urgently but without noise is to relinquish credit. To do the task without praise, to obey without spotlight, it is to trust that the one who asked you sees it all, that he measures not the size of the task, but the heart behind it. And when the soul obeys in silence, it is not hiding, it is protecting what has been entrusted until the time is right. And sometimes the time never comes to speak of it at all. Sometimes the silence is lifelong. Sometimes the opened thing is not for sharing, but for shaping. This is where faith matures, not in noise, not in urgency alone, but in the tension between obedience and restraint, between opening what must be opened and keeping still when every impulse says, "Tell the world." The one who has heard this double call, now but quietly walks a narrow road, but not a lonely one. For though the world may not understand, heaven leans in close, and what is done in silence echoes louder in eternity than all the shouting in the world. There are moments in life when the soul becomes aware of a quiet imperative, a pressure not from the outside world, but from the weight of the eternal. Something is being asked of you, not gently, not vaguely, but urgently. There is no angel in the sky, no booming voice, yet the command is unmistakable. Open this. Not later, not when it makes sense, not when you feel prepared, now. This urgency isn't born of panic, but of divine timing. It is as though heaven has held something sealed until this very moment, and now, suddenly, it must be uncovered. But even as your hand moves toward it, another voice speaks, softer but no less certain. Open it, but in silence. This second command cuts against all our instincts. If a thing is important, shouldn't it be declared? Shouldn't urgency be accompanied by volume? In the world, urgency demands visibility. Important things must be broadcasted. But God's way is not the way of performance. He values the moment itself more than the noise that surrounds it. When God says, "Open it in silence," He is not minimizing the act. He is magnifying its holiness. Some things are too sacred for spectacle. They must be received in stillness, like rain on dry earth, like breath returned to the lungs after a long silence. We often forget that silence is not the absence of action. It is sometimes the most profound form of action. The silence God requires is not passive, it is attentive. It is the kind of silence that listens more than it speaks, that observes more than it reacts. When we are commanded to open something silently, it is because God is doing something that cannot survive the noise of public scrutiny. Revelation must grow in hiddenness before it is ready to bear fruit. Just as roots grow down before the tree grows up, so must divine truths be anchored in the soul before they can be spoken. This opening, silent though it may be, is still costly. It requires courage, the kind that isn't flashy or loud, but deeply rooted. You must trust that obedience is enough, even when no one sees it. You must believe that what you're doing in the quiet matters as much, if not more, than what is done on the stage. That is the hidden cost of holy work, not that it's hard to do, but that it must often be done without the reward of recognition. And this is how God preserves the purity of it. By asking us to act without seeking approval, He frees us to obey out of love alone. And so you carry the task. You open what has been sealed. You do it in the time appointed. You do it with trembling hands, yes, but also with a still heart. You resist the urge to explain, to justify, to draw attention, not because the moment is small, but because it is sacred, and sacred things lose their weight when dragged into noise too soon. There will be time for speaking, perhaps, but for now your silence is not empty. It is full of trust, full of reverence, full of the quiet knowledge that God is watching, that heaven has leaned in, that the veil has been drawn back just enough for you to step forward. What begins in silence does not stay small. It grows in ways you may never see. It echoes in eternity. The quiet obedience of today becomes the foundation for what God will reveal in due time. So when the moment comes, do not hesitate. Open what has been given. Open it now. But do not shout. Do not explain. Simply kneel. Let the silence bear witness. Let heaven do the rest.